Recently, the Palm Springs Kiwanis Club had another great speaker. Let's listen in.
And if you're old enough to remember Maggie and Jiggs and the Funny Papers, that's what I got named for a nickname. And my father walked up to the window in the nursery, and the first time he laid eyes on me, I had bright red hair, and it was only in the back, and you know how the nurses fluff it up to make it look a little bigger, and it sort of stuck straight up, but I was bald in front, and I'm getting that way again now. But if you can remember what Jiggs looked like, he looked just like me at the age of 6 or 8 hours, And he said all the other little babies in the nursery were sleeping peacefully, and the blanket was tucked up under their chin, and they're all asleep. Not me. He said I was shaking my fists and screaming at the top of my lungs. And he goes back to my mother in the hospital bed, and she said, well, what does the baby look like? He says he looks like Jiggs after a hard Saturday night. So my real name is James. I only call it my check signing name now because that's about all I do with it. And I was named after my father. He was James, and they called him Jimmy, so they didn't want to call me Jimmy. So the nickname Jiggs stuck. And then when I became a writer and got involved with journalism, I wanted a unique byline. And it was unique, and pretty much still is. When Google came along, and I started Googling my name to see what was going on, and I have a lot of articles with the name Jiggs Gallagher on it. And I was the only, I was always proud that I was the only person I pulled up on Google with those two names together, if you put the quotes around it, in the world. However, that's no longer the case. It finally pulled up a Notre Dame tight end or something in 1926 in the Notre Dame yearbook. There was a guy named Joseph Gallagher whose nickname was Jiggs, so it says Joseph parenthesis Jiggs Gallagher, and now the Google search pulls him up. I'm sure he's long gone from the earth, but he was in the 1926 yearbook. He was a senior at Notre Dame. So anyway, I was born in Washington D.C. In an old hospital that doesn't exist anymore at 18th and I. Anybody from or spent a lot of time in D.C. ever besides Dennis? 18th and I. That's about three and a half blocks from the White House, which is 16th and what would be G, if G Street ran across it. They call it Pennsylvania Avenue at that point. And now it's not a street anymore since 9/11. It's all become a pedestrian mall. And so I always say that that's about as close as I'm going to get to the White House in this lifetime, maybe the next one sometime. I got interested in writing at an early age. I was editor of my high school newspaper, and I wanted to become a journalist. My big hero was William F. Buckley, and I think it was more the television show. I wanted to be a TV star and have a talk show like him. I got to meet him a couple times at firing line tapings. So anyway, I went to Columbia University in New York to get my master's degree in journalism, and then I came back to D.C. and got involved with public radio in the very beginnings of NPR. I think they had founded it in 1971, and I graduated in the spring of '72. And I worked at a station in suburban Maryland, so I got to know Susan Stamberg and Mike Waters with All Things Considered, and Bob Edwards, who later went on to do the Morning Edition show. And I got to be the local kind of correspondent for all those shows, especially when elections would roll around. They'd do a phoner with me and say, well, Jiggs, what's happening in the Maryland suburbs of D.C.? And I'd give them the vote count, from the latest statistics. Then I went on to the Baltimore afternoon paper called the News American. It was the Hearst paper for many years, but it was a linear descendant of one of the oldest newspapers in the United States, the Baltimore News, which had been founded in the early 1770s when Baltimore was still part of the colony of Maryland before it became a state. Sadly, that paper is now gone, died in 1986. For a while after I left that, I worked part-time for the Baltimore Sun as a copy editor. And then I fell into public relations work for nonprofits. I was with a church organization for 4 years there in D.C. And one of my most memorable events with them was a visiting minister from Russia, from Moscow. And this is at the height of the Cold War, if you remember, when Jimmy Carter was still president. And this man came over for a visit and a tour of the United States. And I arranged an interview with the Associated Press religion editor, whom probably Dennis knows. His first name was David, but I can't recall his last name anymore. But I got an interview with this man, and then I drove him from the suburbs into downtown D.C. to the National Press Club at 14th and F Street. And as we're driving down the street looking for a parking space, in his heavily accented Russian, he leans over to me and says, "Can we trust this man?" And I'm thinking, he's a reporter for the Associated Press. And then I was sort of thinking in my head, well, he's a Russian, and I guess they don't trust anybody. You never know. And I said, yes, I believe we can trust this man. So we went in, had the interview, and then took him back. My other fun thing, I used to have to squire visiting people around town, and we had a man who was called a king of Nigeria. Now, you all know about the Nigerian scams, you know, with the money in the broken English and all the misspellings on the emails. Well, this guy actually was some kind of hereditary ruler in a small area. I found out, you know, through talking with him and other people, that it was really more like sort of a county executive or mayor or something. Anyway, but they had a lot of oil money. As you may know, Nigeria is the largest oil producer in Africa. And so this guy in all these flowing blue robes and blue pants and blue turban and all of this. And I'm taking him around to the Capitol and the monuments, you know, and we went to Mount Vernon and all of that. And as we're riding around in the car, he says, "I need luggage." He says, "Take me somewhere I can buy luggage." So I took him to the old Woodward and Lothrop, Woody's, down on F Street. And I felt like, you know, like an interpreter or something like that. I'm walking up to the clerk in the luggage department and said, "This man is a king from Nigeria." And I thought, he must think I'm absolutely out of my mind, you know. So I'm trying to explain it all. And so we got our luggage and went home. So those were the kinds of fun things that I got to do there. Then I moved out to Nebraska and became a Midwesterner. And I taught in a college and also was PR director of the college in Lincoln, Nebraska. It was a wonderful place to live. Great city, great state. Cornhuskers, yeah. We had a great life there, actually, and I enjoyed myself. I also worked with a public radio station there at that college, and I actually interviewed Peter Schickley. Anybody ever heard of P.D.Q. Bach? No. Okay. He's not so active anymore. I guess he's getting up there, and he now writes under his own name of Peter Schickley. But he invented this mythical son. You know, Johann Sebastian Bach's children are all three initials, CPE Bach, and I forget all he had 12 or 14 children, something like that. And so he invented this, you know, PDQ Bach, and it was a fictional character, and then he would write funny music and do interviews and a whole program. He did one at the Kennedy Center, and I interviewed him there for the station I was working for. And then lo and behold, 10, 12 years later, I'm in Lincoln, Nebraska, and he comes through town again, and I immediately called his people and said, I got to interview him again. I had the best time. He used to say that PDQ Bach's dates of his life were 1807 to 1752. And so I, playing straight man, you know, with him on the interview, I said, isn't this backwards? And he says, well, He said it was more of a comment on the quality of his music than that he lived his life in retrograde. So I used to enjoy doing those kinds of things. I came to California in 1984 to work for Glendale Adventist Medical Center and did PR there. I was there not 2.5 weeks into the job when I had the biggest public relations responsibility probably of my whole life. We had a right to die case going on in the hospital with a gentleman who had been a dental equipment salesman, and he was suffering from multiple, he was not old, he was about 62, but he was suffering from lung cancer and digestive problems, and I can't remember, it was a long laundry list of 3 or 4 things, all of which were fatal. And he was on a trachea, breathing tube, and he had sporadically indicated that he wanted the tube removed, and his wife and family all wanted the tube removed and to allow him to die. At this time, especially in California, what was happening was that the law had not been clarified yet, and a doctor in Santa Barbara had a very similar case, and the family had asked for the tube to be removed, and he complied with that request. And then the family had buyer's remorse. Once he died, they said, we never should have done that, and the hospital shouldn't have done it, and the doctor shouldn't have done it. So they went to court and actually sued the medical hospital and the doctor personally. And so that scared the entire medical establishment of California for a couple of years, and our hospital included. And they said, no way are we disconnecting anything on this because the law was, so they had this headbutting, and the family of the man in our hospital went to court, went to California court, was appealed, went to a federal district court, and this thing dragged on for about 6 months. So meanwhile, Mike Wallace and 60 Minutes show up 2.5 weeks after I started the job. Mike Wallace's producer started with me, and we worked everything out by telephone. Then Wallace himself came, interviewed the family, sat at the bedside, talking because he couldn't speak with the patient. And the whole thing was very complicated. The thing that sticks in my mind about it was they did all this pre-taping and filming, and so that was about 2 weeks before it was going to air. As you know, 60 Minutes is Sundays at 7. So at 10 minutes to 4 Pacific time, I get a call from, and I was in an amateur production of Joseph and the Amazing Technicolor Dreamcoat. Now, if you've ever seen Joseph, it's a very minor part for the baker and the butler who are in jail, and they tell their dreams to Joseph, and Joseph has good news for the butler and bad news for the baker. Well, I was the butler, so I got to be happy at the end of the telling of it. But I was dancing and doing all this choreography and singing. So I'm backstage, and this is pre-cell phones, pre-even the big shoebox phones. But they arranged for a telephone that I could be called at, and they had to call me at 10 of 4 just to check and make sure that he hadn't died in the last hour or couple of hours, since they talked to me before that, because they were going on the air and saying that he was still alive. And I assured them that he was, because I had checked with the hospital. So at any rate, it finally went to a U.S. District Appeals Court on early November on a Tuesday. And the gentleman passed away the night before, was still with the tube in his throat. And the family's lawyers decided to continue the case just to set a precedent for the law. And the hospital actually did lose. The family did win, and it's now a settled law in California that people do have the right to not have extreme measures carried out. But that was quite an experience from a public relations standpoint. I then got out of PR for a little while, and I worked for a group called Elder Hostel. I don't know if you've been involved with it or familiar. They're based in Boston, and I was their California director for those 11 years, setting up non-credit travel and education programs all over the state. And I was living in LA at the time, but I used to travel. Most of my week was spent on the road, and I had quite a few programs here. Right now, we have a big one through that group. For the film festival, we have about 200, 250 people at the Renaissance Hotel, and they're attending the film festival as a group for that. We also had Cahuilla Indian programs and basket making and art and tennis instruction, golf instruction, things like that. And we have, as I say, all over the state of California with various interesting programs. They changed the name of the organization about 7 years ago, and it's no longer Elder Hostel. They call it Road Scholar, R-O-A-D. But it's the same group, same people running it, and the actual corporation is still Elder Hostel Incorporated. After that little diversion out of PR, I went back to my roots and worked for Cal State San Bernardino for 12 years as public affairs writer and editor. I was the speech writer for the president of the university. I was involved in all of the building and opening of every building at the Cook Street campus in Palm Desert out here. And just in the last year, I've been teaching news writing and feature writing in their communication studies program at the Cook Street campus, so I've enjoyed that too. I retired from Cal State in 2011, and then I've been doing all kinds of fun things. I went back full-time at Loma Linda University and was PR editor and writer there for 2 years. And then I left it last December, just a year ago, last month, and sort of retired again. I keep unretiring and retiring. This time I went back to a half-time job at Palm Desert Library out in Palm Desert, right next door to the McCallum Theater. We share a big building. Our half is the City of Palm Desert's public library. The other half is the College of the Desert's library for the academic programs. And I brought you a brochure, so hope everybody got it. We have some more up here if you didn't get it. I just wanted to go through a couple of things that we do. I'm called the Special Events Coordinator, and so in that role I set up speaking series and author and book luncheons and autograph signing sessions for authors. We have a Monday meditation series of yoga in our community room twice a month. We have movie nights. In October they had an election movie series where they showed Citizen Kane, The American President, Dave, a whole bunch of movies about the presidency. Nothing political particularly about it, at least it wasn't related to this year's events. But if you open this little brochure up, if you skip over to the midsection here where it says Special Events 2016-17 season, you'll see two big ones up there called Chef's Table and Sunday Sounds. The Chef's Table series starts in tomorrow in earnest, and it's going to be every Thursday through the end of February. And it's kind of a celebrity chef program. We don't have room for it in the library, so we do it in the community recreation center across on the other side of the driving range there. And it's right behind Palm Desert City Hall, where there's a YMCA and the community rec center. Holds about 200 people. And we bring in all these fun chefs. We're going to have Jan Boydston from Kitchen Kitchen. Tomorrow is the chef from Desert Willow, Francois Gertner, and you'll see the list of them here every week. They're all at Thursdays at 2 o'clock. They're first come, first served. It's free, and they give away tasting samples of everything that they cook. And we hook up a TV camera that we have trained on their hands when they're doing all the mixing and everything, so that we project that over their heads so everybody in the building can see it. So those are Thursday events. The Sunday afternoon events, starting this Sunday, is also in the same place, and they're music concerts of jazz, folk music, all kinds of things, Dixieland. They're all also at 2 o'clock, and they're free as well. So if you'd like to enjoy those things, come along and see it. You'll see all of our children's programs listed. Lots of things for infants, small children, teens. We have a teen director for the library. And we started another movie series called Monday Matinee at 2:30 on Mondays once a month. And those are just old popular movies. We're doing Alfred Hitchcock's, I'm blanking on it now, but it's one of the mysteries. It'll come to me. We're going to show Rebel Without a Cause on February 6th, because February 8th would have been James Dean's 85th birthday next month. So we're going to celebrate that as a fun thing. We have a writers group called Write On, and since I'm a writer, I'm coordinating that one. Another one with a book club called Hooked on Books. So we try to serve diverse audiences, and if you see anything that interests you, it's all free. I know it's a little trek. When we moved here in 2006 from LA, my wife, we got our doctor at Desert Oasis over here on El Cielo by the airport, and we live in Cathedral City, and all of our neighbors said, "You drive all the way to Palm Springs to go to the doctor?" And we said, "It's 18 minutes." And we'd say, if we had that in LA, we'd think we died and gone to heaven. I also died and went to heaven when I saw the pharmacy. We lived on the west side of LA, and we had a pharmacy inside a supermarket. And the pharmacy's hours were different from the supermarket's hours. And I could never remember, whether I could still go get a prescription. And it was always, I had to write things down all the time. So when we got this house, I stopped at Walgreens at Dinah Shore and Date Palm, and I said, "When are you closed?" And he said, "We never close." And I said, "Yeah, but what about holidays?" He said, No, we never close. I said, "Well, what about the pharmacy inside the drugstore?" He said, "The store never closes and the pharmacy never closes." And I said, "But what about Christmas?" He said, "See, we never close." What was it I didn't get? So I had to get on my cell phone and call her. She was still in LA, and I said, "Randy, we've died and gone to old people's heaven." I said, "If we're sick at 3 a.m., we can put the bathrobe on and drive through the window." You don't have things like that in LA. Thank you very much. It's delightful to be with you today.
For more, go to KiwanisPalmSprings.org.